Bismillah, welcome friends. So today we welcome Sidi Ali back from his travels, and we're going to have our third session now of the ambiguity of certainty.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa bihi nasta'in. Thank you for taking the time to come on this beginning of a weekend. This will be the third talk and the final one on this series, unless there's demand to continue, on ambiguity as certainty. So it will act mainly as a summation, and I hope we can have some time for questions and answers. The platform from which, or out of which these talks emerged, is the apparent, I won't say contradiction, but paradox between the finite and the infinite, between the limited and the limitless, between the relative and the absolute. Because the core of the paradox is that if you postulate an absolute, or the infinite, or the limitless, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is practically axiomatic that it is that postulate that you're making is unknowable, because you do not have the capacity or the tools to be able to limit it or to explore and explain it. So, for one to get out of this sort of endless circularity of the lesser trying to comprehend the greater, there must be, I don't want to use the word, but I can't think of another word, a kind of ontological break. There has to be a break in the way that you are able to transcend or leap from the limited form in which you are created. Because if the unknowable is known, then it is no longer the unknown. It is no longer the absolute. And all these scriptural texts, the Quran in particular, and also works of inspired beings, they sort of hint at that, or in some cases approach it directly, but don't really provide a exit route out of this paradox. So, if we don't have this kind of break, which allows us, within our finitude, to engage not with the absolute, because we can't, but rather with the simulacrum, the shadow of it, or what we conceive to be its shadow, then we can't really say anything definitive, not about it, because we can't do that, but about our relationships with it. Many of you might have come across the saying from many of the great Sufi masters that only Allah knows Allah. Everything else supposedly then becomes the construct of human beings' conception of the absolute. And if only Allah knows Allah is real and true, then all else must be speculative. And this break, this ontological break, that allows for great spiritual systems to emerge, religions in particular, Islam being one, does not seem to make this sort of seamless connection with the Absolute because of this break. So we have systems that purport to describe, as it were, an entire universe, an entire cosmos, which is oriented in its final deportment or the final analysis towards the Absolute. But it cannot claim to represent it. It cannot claim to be the Absolute's last word, as it were, on the subject. But nevertheless, we take it as having this seamless connection without taking into account this break. And as far as I can see, none of the great spiritual systems address this particular issue. To me, this is the issue, as I've discussed before, is the issue of the boundaries and the limits and the barzakh. Classical teachings, and I dare say the modern equivalent of them, or modern equivalent of those that are continuing this tradition, seem to assume that once you reach this boundary, then something happens, either by grace of Allah, the Wahhab, or by some kind of transcendental leap on the part of the individual that allows that person to cross this chasm and then claim to be in the proximity or in the hadra or the presence of the One. This has always befuddled me, actually. How does this happen? How does this leap across this ontological break, how can it take place? Because if it takes place, then it denies the absoluteness of the Absolute. It seems to create a pathway for the limited, the individual, to merge in this greater presence. And it seems that let's call it the religious mind, tries to explain this leap or this break through some kind of mechanism of mediation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not or cannot. Of course, whatever claim or assertion you make is not true, but cannot be true. But it is made nevertheless, that it is mediated through speech. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks in the Quran to Nabiullah Musa, or through acts that break the chain of cosmic substantiality, what we call miracles, or through agents such as spirits or archangels or so this break is not treated as a break as such, but is treated as a kind of way station between the unknowable and the known. So you end up with a kind of hierarchy of beings and forces that, like a step function, they go down from the cosmic heights down to the layer of terrestrial man. And at the end of this sort of transmission chain, you have the realm of prophets and saints who provide that function directly with human beings. Here I must really pause and stop and not question the veracity of this report, but rather question the way that we have understood it. I have reread a lot of the texts in the last few years and have come to the conclusion, or to the realization is a better word, that this is not how it's mediated. That this universe that we describe, which acts as the scaffolding of our spiritual life, is in fact not a structure that is fashioned in the realm of the unseen, but rather is very much a structure of time and place, but much more importantly of the hals and maqams, of the states and the stations of those who have chosen to describe it to us or to engage with us. So this divine or sacred world is not a world that is fixed hierarchically, but is rather a world in which the unknown and unknowable, through symbols, through allegories, through the condition of the individual, is substantiated at the realm of relative truth. It may not have an absolute truth to it. And the more that you expand the space of relative truth, the less is a space available for untruth in time and space. Might be a bit dense even for me. But what I'm trying to say here is that the truth of spiritual systems lies in their essence, in the quality of those who represent them, rather than in miracles or the flow, as it were, from the realm of the unseen to the realm of the seen. Now, again, the corollary to that is that we cannot, and I will not make any claim as to how the Absolute, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, deals with the cosmos and with human beings. But I can make a case or a statement regarding the other. I can say how I can relate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And knowing full well that whatever claims and assertions I make are not claims that are fixed to absolute truth, but they're fixed to my understanding of truth and to my quality in reflecting that. And I can't really say, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or the God or the Godhead or the Absolute must deal with his creation in fairness and justice and compassion. Because the essence of fairness, justice, and compassion is unknown to us. What we see are its reflections. And these reflections are mediated through the agency of human beings. So my notion of justice, my notion of compassion, my notion of mercy has an essential truth, but the essentiality of it is time-bound. So it cannot be the same as Allah's justice. We can choose to believe that it is, and it is necessary sometimes to do so. It is necessary in order to create some kind of substantiality to this ambiguity, because you cannot deal with ambiguity on an infinite basis. you have to, at some point, see within it sparks or light points or overflows that allow you to reconfirm your certainty. And as these light points become more real, become more established within you, then the ambiguity, the scale between ambiguity and certainty, tips in favor of greater and greater certainty, but it is rooted in an essential ambiguity. If we start by saying, and this has, I've heard that from many masters, in fact, that taking from the Quranic verse that Allah has written upon Himself Rahmah. Out of that, we construct a system whereby the acting out of this Rahmah becomes a force that is essential to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now we cannot impose conditions of actions and conditions of unveiling to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The equation between Allah's rahmah and mercy is a time-bound definition through the prism of spiritually realized beings whose inner conditions are of the highest order. In modern times, some of the modern philosophers actually have sort of hinted at that, although they have moved away from trying to express it in religious terminology. I mean, Wittgenstein is one, where one of his axioms is that what is unspeakable, or what cannot be spoken of, should not be spoken about. So what cannot be understood cannot be spoken about. And then you put that as a statement of sort of axiomatic truth. And against that you have an entire construct of religious systems that seem to contradict this truth. But as I said, it depends on the prism with which you see these systems. So is the divine basis or the sacred basis of religion, is it false? It is false only if you claim that this is the religion or this is the way in which the Absolute has imprinted on the way that we are to interact and deal with it. But it is true if it's the other way around. If it's our imprint on the pathway to this tipping point where ambiguity turns into certainty. For example, there's a famous saying, a hadith Qudsi, about I was a hidden treasure and I wanted to be known, so I created. I think this is commonly known, this hadith. Now, if you take it from as emanating from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it cannot withstand the test of the absoluteness or the absolute remoteness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you switch it from another angle and look at it as an expression of the understanding of how creation came into being from the perspective of an individual whose inner conditions have grown to the point where statements of this kind do have meaning and sense, then it takes on an entirely different attribute. It's commonly said that Hadith Qudsi it is not mediated through an archangel, and it's not part of the Quranic text. It is a true manifestation of a statement made in the realm of the unseen that descended on, in this case, the Prophet. This is a classical interpretation. A much truer interpretation, I think, in my going back to the original formulation that only Allah knows Allah, is that this is an expression of how creation came about, understood and comprehended through the concept of what is the absolute by a person in a high degree of spiritual realization. Now you can call that divine or sacred, but you can't call it absolutely divine or absolutely sacred, because at that point you're making claims on the absolute, which is simply not on, and it's not possible. It is because it comes out in the form of human speech, and because it comes out in the form of words and letters that purportedly are divine in origin, there must be ultimately not the creation but the mediation of individuals, because you cannot put words of absolute authority and absolute veracity and truth at the level of relative authority and relative truth. There are in fact two different arguments here.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So do you see it as a reflection from a source? Are we receivers of this and then expressing it based on our state of being, or is it emanating from us?
No, it's emanating from us, but it is motivated, it is driven by a spark whose origins I know not where. It's constantly asked the question as to where you came, where you're going, and what is the meaning of it all. Now that seed that's planted in every individual, and every individual has it, and some individuals deny that there is any source to it apart from what is seen and felt, and others, that I accept, and others see it as the source is in the unknown and in the unknowable. There is no mechanism by which you can reduce this to a series of equations or to a series of lab tests or a series of... It is impossible that this root of consciousness, apart from its neurological aspects, how it's manifested, can ever, it's like an onion, it can ever find its heart within the realm of existence. So, in that case, it is not the divine speaking to the individual mediated through all kinds of, but it's rather the individual or the realized individual trying to expand his awareness and knowledge and ultimately his freedom to the point where it reaches the boundary. And at that boundary point, there is this leap, as it were, into the unknown, out of which these systems emerge. Now, whether the unknown passes judgment on these systems, we cannot make these assertions. These claims cannot be made on the absolute. They can only be made at our level. So when I say that knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or this ilm al-laduni, that is the knowledge that was given to the great beings, Khidr, prophets, is really a knowledge of the absolute limits of the human capacity to understand and comprehend things at the boundary. And what you throw into the void after that is the sum total of that. It is the sum total of your personal, your historical, your social experience. it is not necessary that there is another party at the other line that grabs that and tells you you're on the right path. The right path is the path that you have mapped out for yourself, aided by the path that was chosen by beings that are historically rooted, whom you know are at the boundary. And you know they're at the boundary not because of say-so, not because of what others claim, but because of your own experience with what they have said and done at the boundary. Now, there is a new, as it were, it's called Kalam al-Jadid. This is not something, what I'm saying is to some extent new. But there is a school that is emerging now. It's called, in Arabic, Kalam al-Jadid. It means the new theology, as it were, in Islam, in which many of these key conceptual formulations, like revelation or iha, or formulations such as prophecy, or the unaltered word of God, the Quran. All of that is being revisited and reconfigured in ways that reduces the authoritativeness of the classical interpretations and expands the possibilities that exist within this new ways of looking at it. So, as I said, there are two different arguments here. The classical argument, which has migrated to what we have received and what we know, or what we engage with, and that it is what we have is a divine utterance mediated through a trustworthy medium. So the divinity or the sacredness of it, whether it is the Quran, whether it's Hadith Qudsi, whether it is inspirational exclamations that have a sacred content to them. Some of the couplets of Rumi, for example, have that. That this is mediated. But this, in my mind, this breaks down when the medium that we're talking about is placed at a level of equivalence with the source. For the medium to have the total veracity of the source, it must have some equivalence to it. Must be some connecting point, which is, again, as I said earlier, is not possible. The second, and this has been constantly skirted around, including by some of the great mystics, some of the great Sufi shiur. They are saying, or they had said what I'm going to say now, but they have said it in elusive terms. You have to read really between the lines. You have to look at the intent and whether this intent manifests itself between the lines or not. The second way of looking at it is at the medium of realized beings, of people who have fulfilled their potential of absolute freedom, of total freedom, and can therefore act without any hindrances, without any complexes, without any barriers. This is what the divine would have said, where the divine was going to be asked as to what would have said. For example, the Hadith Qudsi, I was a hidden treasure and I wanted to be known. The way that most people, or the vast majority of people, understand it, who believe in the system of Islam, is that this is a kind of descent from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through, in this case, direct transmission. If you read some of, for example, the way that, again, I'll use that as an example, Ibn Arabi, he doesn't quite say it, but he hints that this is what I believe the divine would have said, where he asked how creation came about. So the sacredness in this is relative, and it is directly connected to the condition of the individual. So not just religious knowledge, not just practices become the outcome of human beings' interaction and desire to formalize the relationship with the Absolute. But religion itself, so it's not just religious knowledge, but religion itself. And in fact, the only thing you can say about the Absolute is that it might assume any infinite number of forms as we ponder it. So when I talk about ambiguity as the way to certainty, is that ambiguity is a structural element in our conceptions of the Absolute. Once we bring the Absolute or make any positive statements about it, then we lose, I think, the veracity. That's why the Shahada starts with La ilaha. It starts with a negation. The negation of the possibility of knowing the Absolute. So, knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, knowledge of the divine, is nothing more, in my opinion, than the extent to which a person's predisposition and inspiration tilts or drives that person towards making more or greater assertions about the Absolute, none of which is authoritative or definite, because that is simply impossible. But again, these are not illusions, because if these were illusions, they would be meaningless. They are the ambiguities of certainties, and hence, in my mind, supremely meaningful. So, the person who says, well, if you can't say anything definitive about it, therefore, whatever you say is meaningless. My response to that is that ambiguity is a structural element of my knowledge of it. And whatever I say, depending on my condition and my sincerity, has within it elements of truth, and therefore point towards the meaningful. And the more I move along that path, and the more I elevate myself on that path, the more it becomes meaningful.
Can I just when you say that, it's basically how I see, obviously this text is very profound, and they have, as you rightly said, there is nothing definitive, yet at the same time, we tend to analyze different expositions and different works of, and we also quote and we consult all the other mystics and their writings. All this is in order for us to make headway in our personal quest, isn't it? So if we are referring to everybody, there's the classical, and then there is which is again superseded by other things and other notions, which carries on happening. But in essence, it can only be something that can resonate to a particular human being, if it speaks to him or her. So it is in that context, I would say, is there an established, there is nothing established or definitive anyway, because even if I have a particular understanding, is it my duty to be able to convince others that this is what the truth is? Because as you said, my truth is very much subject to my own state and purity and my own condition. So if somebody challenges, like you earlier said, if somebody says to you, well, this outcome, it has no meaning. It has no meaning to the other person. It has meaning to you. You cannot transfer your meaning on to the other person. That's what I'm saying. It's very individual, very personal.
Yes, you're right. I mean, it is not something, unless you grow to the point where the fire, as it were, inside you, the Bible calls the fire inside, becomes so consuming that, I said that earlier, that you begin to light up. Now, I don't mean metaphorically light up. So if you metaphorically light up, the power of that is so attractive. It is a form of love, of course. Power of that is so attractive that it brings within its orbit all those moths who are seeking candles. Right? So it is a supremely individual thing. Everything in the end is individual. The entire Muhammadi message is individual. It has, but it is, once it's expressed in an individual, and that individual begins to use that as a kind of fuel for his inner fire, then the glow that comes out from that becomes very, very, very powerful. And I'll quote Iqbal, because I wrote Iqbal too. Yeah. It's from Asrar al-Khudi. This is a translation by Nicholson. He says, "Cast thyself upon the fire like Ruh. Like the bell break silence at last, and from every limb utter forth a lamentation. Thou art fire. Fill the world with thy glow. Make others burn with thy burning." So, see, we think of the self as something, most of the Sufi paths think of the self as something that needs to be managed, needs to be tamed, needs to be contained, needs to be obliterated, needs to be put under some kind of control. I see it the other way around. It is the self needs to be given absolute freedom, needs to expand. Now, I'm not talking about the egotistical self. I'm talking about the self in its capacity to become a burning fire. Cannot be contained. And in fact, we should do the opposite of what we are led to believe, that the mystic path is not only a path of asceticism and denial and doing without. That is only a step in it. The step is not to efface the self or to eliminate it. And then when you eliminate it, then suddenly you are merged with the Godhead. This is just, I'm sorry to say, axiomatically impossible. And experientially it's impossible too. It's the other way around. And if you look at it the other way around, the possibilities within an enlightened self are immensely greater than the possibilities of a self that has lost its selfhood, because it has no capacity to act, a self that has lost its selfhood. And action is an essential part of being. You cannot be in this world unless you act, unless you do. So when the Prophet ﷺ says that monkery or rahbaniyya, being a monk is not part of our way. Monasticism is not part of our way.
This because you're limiting the manifestation of such a cataclysmic spectrum of attributes. Because if I completely detach myself, I will not be able to manifest the attributes which I have the capacity to.
Yes, but they are your attributes, and they come in in various mixtures and various amounts. It's like a chemistry set. You know, your capacity for mercy might be much greater than your capacity for generosity, which might be much less than your capacity for action, which might be much more than your capacity for knowing things. Each one has his own individual chemistry set.
Indeed.
And that chemistry set has to be regulated and formulated in ways where the light becomes greater and greater. So you have to constantly experiment with what are the components of yourself, not so that you degrade them and diminish them, but so that you bring them to their fruition. Now that fulfilled self does not become a mirror. No, it becomes a mirror. It becomes a mirror, yes, but not a reflective mirror. You become a mirror. Now, the mirror to yourself is clear. The mirror to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Allah's world, not mine. I cannot make any claims on that. So, but the polishing of your inner mirror is not so that you reflect the divine grace. It's so that you reflect the most optimal combination of these qualities that you have, that turn you into a fully free human being. And I insist on that word because, you know, I'm not talking about political freedom. I'm talking about freedom of constraints that block the pathway to inner realization through the manipulation of elements within yourself that bring out this quality or these qualities in you.
Emancipation.
Yes, it's an emancipation. Yeah. So freedom in this sense is an emancipation. Yeah. It is, and that is, I think, the manumission of slaves in the Quran has this double meaning. The outer manumission is good. I mean, if you want a slave, let him go. But the inner manumission is also even greater. So all of these terms that we use, which if you want to continue later on, maybe we can discuss them at some later sessions. The terms that constitute, as it were, the building blocks of a spiritualized Islam. If one can look at them again, in terms of, as it were, this new perspective, or this, perhaps it's not new, but this novel way for some of looking at things, then I think you can.
In our, the way that we've been taught is very consistent with what you're saying, that it's not asceticism or, you know, we're not out to destroy the self or confine it, you know. It's a process of development of a bigger self, a greater.
No, this is very good.
Us, you know, and that's where we've always been taught that's not, and that's happens through love. You know, the more love, the capacity for love increases, the more you become free of the.
I mean, love to me is the power, the overwhelming power of attraction. Right? It is what, therefore, it can be sui generis. It can be as a result of your own conditions that create such a powerful magnetic realm around you that becomes defining for others or for a single individual.
For me, it's an attraction towards truthfulness. And maybe that's the relative thing. Instead of absolute truth, it's truthfulness.
Yes.
You know, it's a journey that you can never really get to its ultimate destination, but it is more and more of it that we discover in ourselves. You know,
it is. I think the path is an art, not of being, but of becoming. You're always in the process of moving, always in the process of becoming not some ultimate being that you conceive or you believe you are capable of being, but moving in that direction. And the process of moving, even in your last breath, And there are so many hadiths in this regard. You know, they asked Imam Ali, said, if you know the world is going to end tomorrow, he said, I will still plant my tree. Because it is not my business whether the world will end tomorrow or not. My business is to plant this tree. So the idea of perfectibility of human beings must be seen in this context, rather than in the context of matching some kind of, revealed spectrum of actions and rituals and codes and so on. These actions and rituals, we may subscribe to them willingly, but they are for us. Again, if you go to the Quran, for example, these prayer is not meant for Allah. It's for you. Whatever you do is for your own elevation, and if it doesn't add to that elevation, if it doesn't add to that process of becoming, then it is not doing its job, and therefore, I don't advise that you abandon it, but therefore you have to ask seriously whether the path does it lead from prayer to self-knowledge, or does it lead from self-knowledge to prayer? I think it's the other way around. Self-knowledge puts you in a condition of prayer. If prayer in its broader, in its conceptual sense, not in its movements and outer forms and so on.
So when you were speaking of the relative and absolute, there's an ayah in the Quran that maybe substantiates that, which is وَفَوْقَ كُلِّ ذِي عِلْمٍ عَلِيمٍ. That there's no end to it.
Above every knowledge, there is a greater knower. So it's like an infinite chain of regression. But when I said that the great Sufi masters and poets and so on have discovered that and have said that, but were to some extent constrained by their environment. Some of you who might have read The Conference of the Birds by Attar, and it's I have it in the Arabic version. I think it's written in Farsi.
Right.
But I found an English translation.
Maybe English.
Original, but it's in English.
It's in English, but I think Attar wrote it in Farsi, not in English. Well, I won't read the Arabic because it's too long, but I have a small summary here, which shows the story, for those who don't know it, is about these tens of hundreds of thousands of birds who go on this journey to try to find this mythical king called the Seymurg. And they're led by the hudhud, who's the hoopoe bird. And all kinds of birds show up, sparrows and pigeons and eagles and hawks and chicken, and all going on this journey to find this mythical king bird on top of a mountain, Mount Qaf. And the poem is a very, very long poem, is how these birds go through various trials and tribulations. They pass through the valley of fear, and the valley of perplexity, and the valley of thorns, and the valley of... Finally, out of this huge flock of all kinds of birds, some drop by the wayside, some die, some go back, some can't make it. 30 survive, and they finally reach their destination, which is the realm of the Seymurg. And that's one of the translations that I have. This is towards the end of the poem. And Attar says, in amazement, all of them were startled. Again, in another way, did they become amazed. These are the surviving birds. Just Seymurg in Farsi, Say is 30. So it's 30 birds. It's also Seymurg, it's one word, which is this mythical bird. In amazement, all of them were startled. Again, in another way, did they become amazed. Themselves, the complete Seymurg they saw. The Seymurg himself, was all the time the Seymurg. So it's an amalgam of two words. When upon the Seymurg they looked, these Seymurg were he, that one in that place. But if upon themselves they looked, these 30 birds, they were that other. And if they looked at both together, both were the one Seymurg in every way. These were that one, and that one was these. In all the world, nobody had heard this. All those were left consumed by astonishment. They were bereft of the faculty of thought and could not work it out. Since they, from a state of nothingness, nothing understood, wordlessly that majesty they dumbly questioned. They asked for the unveiling of this mighty secret. They asked for the solution of you being us and being you. Wordlessly from that majesty came the reply, that a mirror is this sun-like majesty. Whoever comes to it sees himself. Body and soul, soul and body he sees in it. As you came here, 30 birds, 30 in this mirror have you appeared. Were you to come back 40 or 50 birds, still from yourselves would the veil be lifted. Although numerous you have arrived, you see yourself, and it is yourself you have seen. How might the eye of anyone reach to us? The eye of an ant, the Pleiades reach. Have you seen an ant that could lift an anvil? A gnat that could take an elephant between its teeth? What you knew when you saw it, it was not that. And what you said and heard, it was not that. All these valleys which you have put behind you, and all this manliness that each of you has performed, all in our affecting have you been. You have lain in the veil of the essence of the attributes. Since you have remained 30 birds amazed, been left without hearts and without patience and without spirit, we are infinitely better than any 30 birds, because we are the quintessential 30 birds. You are obliterated in us in 100 glories and graces, that through us you might again discover yourselves. You have finally been obliterated in us. The shadow has become lost in the sun, and peace be upon you. So, a person like Attar, who wrote this just at the beginning of the Mongol invasion. In fact, he was killed by the Mongols. Attar means he was a perfume maker, but also a great Sufi sage. This final journey of people trying to find this mythical bird, the Seymurg, turns out to be their reflection of themselves as they end this tremendous hardships and reach the point where this king bird resides at the top of Mount Qaf. What this means really is that not that we have in us the essence of the Absolute. We don't. I mean, we should not even contemplate that. But once you reach at the level, at the boundary, at the Sidrat al-Muntaha, the reflection that you see is the reflection of your understanding of what is it that you've been seeking all the time. I don't know if any of you have come across this Lebanese mystic. He's a Christian of the early 20th century by the name of Mikhail Naimi. He wrote a book called the Book of Mirdad. He wrote in English, actually. He lived in New York. He was a kind of contemporary of Gibran. If you have a chance, look at that book. It's I think, an unknown masterpiece, the Book of Mirdad, and it hits upon many of these points that I've tried to raise.
Thank you. We have time for maybe one question, maybe two, if you have. Abbas.
Thank you for the talk. I have a very short question. It's just what you're describing made me think of Friedrich Nietzsche and how he is perceived perceived as this kind of nihilist, but maybe framed in this kind of approach, it could be seen as almost like a constructive nihilism, something which is quite hopeful in his approach. Maybe the Ubermensch is something akin to what you're describing.
No, I agree with that.
He did mention there's one of his writings where he talks about the fire in the belly of the criminal is the same fire in the belly of Michelangelo when he paints the Sistine Chapel. So it's the same fire that can lead to vice or virtue. So I was thinking of this.
No, I think Nietzsche has to be revisited actually, and a lot of, Iqbal is very much influenced by it, also by Bergson. But the idea that Nietzsche, of course, did not put the quest for knowledge of the absolute, even though it's quixotic, at the heart of the project, his project. I think that he has a lot to say about the possibilities within individuals to sort of self-emanate, as it were, to ignite themselves. And the fire of virtuous beings, that's not as a result of some kind of distorted commitment to some body of work and so on. Can be a powerful force for good and change. So I think Nietzsche is... in his book on Samuzara Sutra, last book, Sutra, he touches at that because it is his way of trying to understand the prophetic mind, I think, and how it relates to the sort of sublimity of the enlightened being. Any questions or comments?
It might be a really stupid question.
No, nothing.
Did Prophet Moses speak to God then?
No, well, he spoke to him, but he didn't. Was there a dialogue, you mean, between them? Quranically, yes, but I think you have to look at it metaphorically.
Yeah.
He spoke to him. He says, "Inni ana Allah, la ilaha illa ana."
Not just him.
No, but Prophet Moses in Islam is known as Kalimullah. He's the one to whom God spoke.
I suppose it's the same with the Prophet's night journey.
Yes.
There was no,
But there have been other night journeys amongst some of the Sufi masters. One of them is Barclays. It was behind Barclays' night journey, and also Ibn Arabi's night journey, which is called the Isra ila Maqam al-Isra. I was going to bring it up to them. But he sort of cops out at the beginning by saying, "This is a dream, don't think I'm a prophet."
Maybe the dialogue is with your Rabb versus Allah as the essence in the Quran, because it usually is with Rabbi, not with Allah.
Yes, that's another very good point. Yeah. It's true that when claims are made, they're made about Rabb, not about Allah. But I think that the way that the religion sort of unfolded as a sort of system of worship, and then a social system and a political system, it had to sort of invert itself from the sort of immense struggles of an individual into something that can become canonical and become therefore the building blocks for a civilization. You have to have some markers for that. But in my mind, the truth in the various pathways of Islam, and also of other religions, but I'm speaking about Islam, which I know better. It is really a community of realized beings which find in their community the possibility of completion of the human qualities and freedom. It is not the way it has evolved over time. It's the communal aspects of Islam have always taken, and the political aspects, and the need to keep the ummah, as it were, whole. And you need to have an ijma', and you need to have some kind of system that protects it, has taken precedence over individual realization. Now, as a sort of global project, it might become difficult to legislate for that, or to create sort of individual programs for 6 billion people. You can't do that. You have to have some political systems, some kind of rules of engagement, as it were. But the texts have become really props for the system, rather than the other way around. That the texts have not been used for the prophetic way, for the purpose, I think, for which it was intended. And one of the, I think in the Quran, which one was لقد أخذ قومي هذا القرآن مهجورا. What is the? That's it's a complaint by the Prophet, is that his community has basically put these sacred utterances on a shelf somewhere and forgot about them. They have abandoned them. So it is within the if you read it critically with this perspective, you get an inverse meaning of many of these things. But you have to argue and work against a very established authoritative system. It's very hard now to change.
The process of full realization, and you spoke about, of course, there are figures, mystics who have reached that state of full realization. You spoke about igniting the fire and so on, and expansion and expression. But nevertheless, when that state is reached, and you say it's still, even at that state, that level, it's still a relative. It's still in a relative context. It can never be absolute. But is there almost like a semblance of absoluteness, as opposed to actual absoluteness or certain absoluteness?
Yes, it exists. Yeah, it exists at the level of the
so like a mirror.
Yeah.
You say it's not a mirror to the absolute, but is it almost that way?
Yes, for the person involved, it becomes that. Now, at that level, he has reached the point where ambiguity is nil and certainty is total.
For him.
Now, that cannot, though, become universalized. It's not a universal condition. And I think really we've done a great disservice to this really marvelous access that we have for human self-advancement by turning it into what it's being turned into. It is again a kind of, I think it's a distortion of it in a fundamental sense. What was an instrument of human emancipation has become instead a system of organized worship and a system of power, which has its own authority and its own legitimacy. And the authority has been established over 1400 years of continuous building on an, I believe, an incorrect and inauthentic understanding. Now, you cannot reverse that overnight. But if you still want to use it as one of your main mechanisms for enhancing your emancipation, then you have to read it really as an individually. You have to reach your own conclusions, and you have to wrestle with it at the individual rather than at the received level. And I speak for myself. I think the truth of it for me is, and not just the sacred text, but also some of the great inspired sayings and insights. These are they're fundamental for this kind of unfolding. I think also the time becomes quite clear that أتى الحق وزهق الباطل. The truth, even in its relative form, becomes much more real, much more substantiated. And you start shedding away all these accretions that accumulated over the years.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. You're welcome to stay join us for this.
Reminders.